Every civilization has worshipped something. Some bowed before kings, others before gods carved from marble or cast in bronze. Some built temples that reached toward the heavens, believing salvation waited somewhere above the clouds. Our temples look different. They rise from glass and steel instead of stone. Their stained glass windows glow with stock tickers. Their priests wear tailored suits instead of robes. Their rituals happen every weekday morning, when millions of people wake to chase a number they believe will finally quiet the restlessness inside them. We call it money. But money has always been the visible story. The invisible story is what we hope money will make us become. That distinction changes everything. Because the most dangerous financial secret isn't hidden in offshore bank accounts or locked inside the vaults of central banks. It isn't whispered between billionaires or buried in economics textbooks. It's hidden in plain sight, disguised as one of the oldest instincts our species has ever possessed. An instinct so ancient that it shaped our ancestors long before the first coin was ever minted. And unless we recognize it, no amount of wealth will ever feel like enough. Imagine a man standing before a magnificent cathedral built entirely from gold. Every pillar catches the morning light. Every wall reflects his image back at him in 1,000 different directions. Pilgrims travel across continents just to witness its beauty. They whisper that whoever enters its gates leaves transformed. The man steps inside expecting to find treasure. Instead, he finds only a mirror. At first, he feels disappointed, then confused. Finally, he understands. The cathedral was never built to store gold. It was built to magnify desire. Keep that image in your mind. We'll come back to it. Because by the end of this journey, that cathedral may begin to look uncomfortably familiar. Most people believe money is simply a tool, a practical invention that makes trade easier, a neutral object, neither good nor bad, just paper, metal, and increasingly, numbers glowing on a screen. From this perspective, financial problems appear straightforward. Earn more, spend wisely, invest consistently, build wealth. The equation seems almost mathematical, and yet something doesn't add up. If money were only a tool, why do lottery winners sometimes return to unhappiness after the initial excitement fades? Why have successful executives, celebrated athletes, and billionaires openly admitted that reaching extraordinary levels of wealth didn't silence the feeling that something was still missing? Economists can explain inflation. They can model markets. They can calculate interest rates with astonishing precision. But those equations cannot explain why someone earning twice as much as they did 5 years ago can still lie awake at night feeling financially behind. Nor can they explain why someone who already possesses more than they could spend in several lifetimes continues chasing more with almost desperate intensity. The obvious explanation begins to crack. Perhaps our relationship with money has never been as rational as we imagine. Psychologists have long observed something curious about human beings. We rarely evaluate our lives in isolation. Instead, we evaluate them through comparison. Leon Festinger, who developed social comparison theory, argued that people naturally judge themselves by looking at those around them. Long before social media amplified this tendency, our minds were already scanning the tribe, asking silent questions. How am I doing? Where do I stand? Do I belong? These questions weren't vanity. For our ancestors, status often determined access to food, protection, allies, and opportunities to reproduce. Falling too far behind wasn't merely uncomfortable. It could be dangerous. Natural selection rewarded minds that paid close attention to relative position. That ancient machinery still operates today. Only the tribe has become the entire world. Every morning, someone opens their phone and unknowingly steps into an arena containing millions of lives. A stranger buys a larger house. An old classmate announces a promotion. Someone younger retires early. An entrepreneur celebrates another million. Without realizing it, the brain quietly updates its definition of enough. The finish line moves. Not because reality changed, because comparison did. Money, then, begins to function less like a resource and more like a scoreboard. And scoreboards are never satisfied with yesterday's victory. Here's where the story becomes more unsettling. Most people think they pursue money because they desire wealth. But that isn't entirely true. We pursue money because we believe it can change who we are. Read that again. Not what we own. Who we are. A promotion isn't merely additional income. It's recognition. A luxury watch isn't simply craftsmanship. It's identity worn on the wrist. A larger home isn't just shelter. It's a visible story about success. Money quietly transforms into language. Not the language of economics. The language of significance. This is why two people can receive the exact same salary increase and experience it completely differently. One feels liberated. The other barely notices. The number itself wasn't the source of meaning. The interpretation was. Viktor Frankl spent years observing how human beings search for meaning even under unimaginable suffering. While he wrote about circumstances far more profound than financial ambition, one of his enduring insights remains deeply relevant here. People do not merely respond to events. They respond to the meanings those events carry. Money acquires power because of the meanings we attach to it. Security, freedom, competence, respect, belonging, love. Gradually, a simple economic tool becomes burdened with psychological responsibilities it was never designed to carry. And that's when the trap begins. Consider a child watching two adults speak about money. One conversation is calm. We'll figure it out. Another is filled with fear. We can't afford this. The child isn't learning accounting. They're learning emotion. Over time, money absorbs those emotional associations. For one person, wealth becomes safety. For another, independence. For someone else, proof that they will never again feel powerless. Years later, they may believe they're chasing financial success. But beneath the spreadsheets and career ambitions, something much older is running the show. An emotional memory. Invisible. Unquestioned. Powerful. This is why financial advice so often fails. Not because budgets are useless. Not because investing doesn't matter. But because advice usually speaks to behavior while ignoring identity. Imagine telling someone trapped in quicksand to simply walk faster. The instruction isn't technically wrong. It simply ignores the force beneath their feet. Likewise, telling people to think long-term or save more assumes that financial decisions are primarily logical calculations. Behavioral economics has spent decades demonstrating otherwise. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky revealed that human beings consistently depart from perfect rationality. We fear losses more intensely than we celebrate equivalent gains. We overreact to immediate rewards while discounting distant consequences. Emotion quietly edits reason before reason believes it has spoken. The market doesn't merely fluctuate. Our perception fluctuates with it. And perception shapes behavior. But even these cognitive biases don't reach the deepest layer. Because beneath irrational decisions lies an even more fundamental question. What exactly are we trying to buy? Freedom? Sometimes. Comfort? Occasionally. But look closely enough, and another pattern begins to emerge. Imagine two neighbors purchasing nearly identical cars. One keeps theirs immaculate, but rarely thinks about it. The other feels a surge of pride every time someone notices. The cars perform the same function. Yet psychologically, they are completely different objects. One transports a person. The other transports an identity. Thorstein Veblen noticed this more than a century ago when he described conspicuous consumption, the tendency to purchase certain goods not merely for their usefulness, but for what they communicate to others. It's tempting to dismiss this as shallow vanity. That would be a mistake. Status signaling didn't emerge because humans became materialistic. It emerged because social creatures constantly communicate invisible information through visible symbols. Clothing, homes, titles, education, language, and yes, money. These symbols answer a question we rarely ask aloud. Where do I belong? Notice what has happened. Without realizing it, we've moved astonishingly far from economics. We're no longer talking about currency. We're talking about identity. And identity obeys very different rules. It defends itself. It seeks confirmation. It resists contradiction. Which explains why financial decisions often feel strangely emotional. even when the numbers suggest otherwise. Selling a losing investment can feel like admitting failure. Accepting a lower-paying career that aligns with your values can feel irrational, even if it leads to a richer life. Turning down status symbols can feel like disappearing. Because once money becomes intertwined with identity, every financial choice quietly transforms into a personal one. The market is no longer just evaluating assets. It feels as though it's evaluating you. And this is where the real secret begins to reveal itself. Not all wealth is accumulated because people desire comfort. Some wealth is accumulated because people are terrified of becoming invisible. That fear doesn't belong only to billionaires or executives. It lives in almost all of us. The longing to matter. The longing to be seen. The longing to know that our existence leaves some kind of mark upon the world. Money simply becomes one of the most persuasive symbols promising to answer that longing. But promises are not the same as fulfillment. And hidden inside that difference lies the mechanism that quietly shapes not only our financial lives, but the modern world itself. In the next part, we'll uncover why even extraordinary wealth often fails to satisfy, how comparison became one of the world's most profitable industries, and why the true currency driving civilization may never have been money at all. The tragedy is that the pursuit itself is rarely the problem. Human beings have always reached beyond what they already possess. We crossed oceans because curiosity refused to remain on familiar shores. We built cities because survival demanded cooperation. We invented tools, language, agriculture, medicine, and art because imagining a better future is one of our species' defining gifts. Ambition is not the enemy. The question is what ambition begins to serve. Somewhere along the way, many of us stop using money as a means to build a meaningful life. Instead, we begin using life as a means to accumulate money. The relationship quietly reverses. And because the reversal happens gradually, it rarely feels like a choice. It feels like adulthood. Wake up. Work harder. Earn more. Upgrade. Repeat. The rhythm becomes so familiar that questioning it almost feels irresponsible. But familiar isn't the same as true. In Greek mythology, King Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. At first, the gift felt like limitless abundance. Flowers became treasure. Furniture became priceless. Even the walls of his palace glittered with impossible wealth. Only later did he discover the curse hidden inside the blessing. Food became inedible. Water became metal. The embrace of his daughter became lifeless gold. The story has endured for thousands of years because it was never really about gold. It was about what happens when one value expands until it consumes every other. Our version of the myth is quieter. We don't watch loved ones become statues before our eyes. We watch conversations interrupted by notifications. Weekends surrendered to emails. Friendships postponed until life becomes less busy. Children who slowly stop asking us to play because they have learned the answer before the question is even finished. Nothing dramatic happens. Life simply becomes organized around a number that always seems to belong to the future. The irony is difficult to see while living inside it. Money promises freedom. The golden cage rarely feels like a cage while it's still being built. Psychologists describe something called hedonic adaptation. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to adjust to improved circumstances. What once felt extraordinary gradually becomes ordinary. Yesterday's luxury becomes today's expectation. The first significant paycheck feels transformative. Months later, it feels normal. The dream house becomes simply the house. The expensive watch becomes just another object in a drawer. The excitement fades, not because we are ungrateful, but because the human nervous system is designed to normalize what is familiar. If it didn't, we would remain overwhelmed by every positive change we ever experienced. This ability helps us survive. But it also means satisfaction has a remarkably short memory. The problem isn't that desire exists. The problem is that desire quietly changes its target. We imagine that reaching the summit will finally allow us to rest. Instead, the mountain grows another peak. And another after that. Economist Richard S. Turlin noticed something curious while studying happiness and income. As societies became wealthier, average happiness did not rise in proportion to economic growth. Financial progress undoubtedly improved lives in countless important ways, especially by reducing poverty and expanding opportunity. Yet beyond meeting fundamental needs, the relationship between more income and greater happiness became far more complicated than common intuition suggested. That observation became known as the Easterlin paradox. Not because money doesn't matter. It does. Security matters. Healthcare matters. Education matters. The ability to provide for the people we love matters deeply. But once survival loosens its grip, another force begins steering the ship. Comparison. No matter how much ground you cover, the distance remaining somehow stays the same. Eventually, exhaustion begins to feel normal. Modern life has perfected this illusion. For most of history, comparison happened locally. You measured your life against neighbors, relatives, or members of your village. The circle was limited. Today, a single afternoon can expose you to the achievements of entrepreneurs in Dubai, artists in Paris, athletes in Los Angeles, investors in Singapore, and influencers vacationing somewhere impossibly beautiful. Your brain was designed to compare itself with perhaps a few dozen familiar people. Every image quietly whispers the same suggestion. More. Better. Higher. Without noticing, your internal definition of success stretches just beyond your reach. Again. And again. This is why comparison has become one of the most profitable industries ever created. Not because companies manufacture dissatisfaction from nothing, but because dissatisfaction already exists as part of being human. Modern technology simply learned how to amplify it. Attention became a marketplace. Envy became engagement. Identity became advertising space. Perhaps the greatest financial secret ruining the world is not hidden inside financial institutions at all. It is hidden inside a psychological mechanism that convinces us our worth can be measured from the outside. The moment wealth becomes evidence of who you are, it can never become enough. That is the trap. Not because wealth has limits, but because identity has an endless appetite for reassurance. Carl Jung wrote that what remains unconscious directs our lives, and we call it fate. Think about that for a moment. If the unconscious belief guiding our financial decisions is, "I will finally be worthy when I have enough," then no amount will ever truly satisfy it. Because the problem was never numerical. It was existential. Money cannot answer a question it was never designed to answer. Am I enough? Only consciousness can expose that confusion. This is why two people can inherit the same fortune and live entirely different psychological lives. One experiences gratitude. The other experiences fear. One sees possibility. The other sees something fragile that must be protected at all costs. Externally, their wealth appears identical. Internally, they inhabit completely different worlds. Because reality is filtered through identity before it becomes experience. Remember the Cathedral of Gold? Earlier, we left a man standing before a mirror where he expected to find treasure. Now we can understand why. The cathedral wasn't mocking him. It was revealing him. Every golden wall reflected the same face back. Not richer. Not poorer. Simply the person who had walked in carrying invisible questions no amount of gold could answer. Who am I without what I own? What remains when the symbols disappear? What kind of wealth survives comparison? These questions sound philosophical. In truth, they are profoundly practical. Because every society eventually becomes organized around whatever it mistakes for value. When value is confused with status, relationships become transactions. When value is confused with productivity, rest begins to feel like guilt. When value is confused with visibility, silence starts to resemble failure. And when value is confused with money alone, human beings slowly become investments, including themselves. Perhaps this is why some of history's most influential thinkers spoke about wealth with remarkable caution. The Stoics argued that external possessions should remain servants rather than masters. Viktor Frankl believed meaning emerged not from accumulation, but from the way we responded to life itself. Even Adam Smith, remembered primarily as the father of modern economics, wrote extensively about moral sentiments and the deeply social nature of human judgment long before publishing The Wealth of Nations. Across different centuries and different disciplines, they pointed toward a similar insight. Prosperity is valuable, but prosperity without self-understanding is unstable. Because whatever we fail to understand about ourselves eventually finds another language. Sometimes it speaks through anxiety, sometimes through addiction, sometimes through endless consumption, sometimes through work that never seems finished, sometimes through a bank account that grows larger while the quiet fear beneath it remains exactly the same. The invisible mechanism was never money. Money was simply the stage upon which a much older drama continued to unfold. The drama of belonging, of significance, of the desperate hope that one more achievement, one more purchase, one more promotion might finally silence the oldest fear a human being can carry. The fear of not being enough. That fear has built civilizations. It has inspired breathtaking innovation. It has also justified exploitation, corruption, and wars. Not because money is evil, but because symbols become dangerous when we forget they are symbols. A map becomes dangerous when mistaken for the territory. A mirror becomes dangerous when mistaken for the self. Money becomes dangerous when mistaken for the measure of a human life. Which brings us back to where we began. Every civilization worships something. The question has never been whether we worship, only what we choose to place at the center of the cathedral. Gold has extraordinary power. It can build hospitals, educate children, fund discoveries, and free people from needless suffering. Used wisely, wealth expands human possibility. But it cannot tell you who you are. And the moment you ask it to, the pursuit quietly transforms from freedom into captivity. Perhaps that is the forbidden financial secret hiding in plain sight. Not that the world is controlled by money, but that so many of us have allowed money to control the story we tell about ourselves. And if the wealth you spent your entire life pursuing could never answer the question you were really asking, what question have you been trying to answer all along?